Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your rear brake pads on a 2015 Honda Accord Crosstour. I've already done the front brakes on this vehicle, and I'll get a link to that video in the description for you. Now in this case, we're just going to change out the pads. We're not going to mess with the rotors today. This is a disc drum combo. This larger section here, this is actually where your parking brake sits. It's inside this little drum. You have some mini drum brakes. We're not going to mess with that today. We're just going to be changing out the brake pads. And to do that, the first thing we need to do is loosen and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts. And those are 12 millimeter. Mid-torque Milwaukee here. Just seems to zap those off pretty quick, but we'll set those aside. Now if you're careful and don't pry on this little spring, this just kind of holds the pads down, but you can see it's just kind of wedged in here, and they're a little tricky, so I usually just don't mess with it unless I'm changing it or unless there's an issue with it. But let's just kind of pull this caliper straight off like that. Now I'm just kind of setting it right there. This is a lightweight caliper, so we're really not putting too much stress on the brake line, but you don't really want to just drop that. All right, then we can just pull out the old pad here on this side, and you can see it's pretty worn down. And this hardware here, these little metal pieces, just kind of pry those out as well. Our kit does come with new pieces. All right, we're also going to take out and clean and re-grease these slide pins here. You can see they're a little stiff. You can kind of just pull out the slide pin and twist. Just kind of twist and pull those off. There's a little shoulder that this rubber boot catches sometimes, but that grease gets dirty and gets a little bit of dust and debris in there. Sometimes I'll put it back in a few times and try to get more of that old grease out. And this is the grease I'm using. It's Sil-Glide. It's a great grease for caliper slide pins. I'm just going to use the clean part of the back of my glove here and just kind of spread that around a little bit like that, and then push it in. And sometimes you need to squeeze that little boot to burp any of the air that's stuck inside there. There you go, that spins a little bit easier now. Just kind of move that caliper out of the way, pull this one out here too. And it's important that you don't use regular grease on this because it just gets too hot and it will really get sticky, and these will bind up and that'll cause your brake pads to drag. Just a little bit new grease there. That's all it really needs. And then squeeze on that rubber boot, get that air out, and then just make sure that that spins freely. The instructions say to lubricate all contact points, and that allows the brake pads to slide on here. You don't want to use a lot of grease on here because that will gather dust. Now if you live in a really rusty area, you might have some rust building up here. I've noticed a lot of people are now putting grease on here, and I don't think it's a bad idea, just to get a thin layer. Make sure you don't get any on the rotor. You may need to clean these, but these look pretty good. This is really just more of a protectant than a lubricant here. And then we're going to put these pieces back on, or these new pieces on rather. And the tricky part to these is you really just need to get them seated all the way. Sometimes you got to get a little screwdriver like this and put it in the center there, and almost just kind of tap and force those in place. If you don't, these little prongs there will stick up and they'll scratch on the rotor. Same with this one here. Just press that into place first, and then yeah, it's just really not seated until you use a screwdriver or something to tap it up into place, and then that looks good. And you can always just test it by spinning the rotor a few times. Make sure that it's not rubbing on that inside metal prong. That looks good. Now we can put our new outside pad on. You can see these have shims already on the back. I just put a little bit of grease at the contact points here on the part of the caliper that touches that, and a little bit on these little ears or the ends. That's the part that slides on here. Just don't get any grease on the friction surface of the pad. That looks good. Now before we change out the old pad on the inside, we're going to use it to press the caliper piston back in, and I'm just going to use this little caliper compression tool, and it just slides right in there, and then you just twist that in. Now before you do this, it's a good idea to pop the hood and take a look at the level of fluid in your master cylinder. All right, now our hood support struts are completely gone, so this is wanting to come down on me, so I'll do this quick. But here's your master cylinder, and you can see right there the level. It's pretty high, but there is just enough room that we'll be able to push the pistons back in and push the fluid up in here. You don't have to remove this cap in order to push the fluid backwards. The little air that's trapped in there will easily be able to escape, and it doesn't cause any additional resistance. I've done this many times. A lot of people think you need to remove this cap to be able to push that back in, and it makes no difference. Any air in there will be able to escape. Because the fluid absorbs moisture in the air, I like to not open that cap and allow new air with new moisture in there, which will degrade the brake fluid over time. But we're good, so we can get back down there and push that caliper piston back in. All right, so we know we can push this back in, and that's just as simple as just turning this handle, and you can see that that's threaded similar to a C-clamp. Of course, you can use a C-clamp too. We're just going to turn that in. When you do this, I always also like to keep an eye on that rubber boot around the piston, make sure that that's not folding or creasing or anything. There we go. That's as far as that needs to go. Now when changing this pad, it's as easy as just pulling it out like that. You can see it's got these little prongs that hold it in place. And again, here, this is just the hold down spring. If this comes out, it's a little bit of a pain, but you can put it back in. You see it's just got these little ears here that just kind of hang on the shoulders up here, and you can force it back in. Ours is still in good shape, and we did not get a new one in the kit, so we're not going to bother with that. Now, just because it keeps a little bit of the noise down, I am going to put a little bit of Sil Glide on the face of that caliper piston, and I kind of already put some on this outside edge here, but that will help. Also, if I put a little bit on the inside, it'll help push this in. I usually put grease, on the back of the pads where they touch the caliper, but this one's kind of hard to do because of these prongs. But I am going to also put a little bit at the end of each one, which will help that slide on this little piece right here when it goes in. So there we go. Just make sure you don't have any grease on the parts of your fingers that you're going to use to press this in. But it's pretty easy if you just line it up. Just make sure that all three of those prongs are in that little circle or in that opening, and just press it in. Did we get it? Almost. Oh, we're kind of hung up on the inside of that spring, so there we go. Yeah, I got a little bit of grease on that pad, so we'll get something to clean that off. So again, just don't get any grease on that friction surface. But now we're ready to put the caliper back on with that pad, and just kind of pull on that, get it to line up. Now here, you also need to pull a little bit on the slide pins to get that to go over. Just make sure that nothing is bound up. Make sure that spring is still intact and everything is lined up with these little retainer clips, that everything's going to slide in there easily and freely, which it looks like it will. And then we can get these little bolts started. Just going to snug these up now. And the torque spec for these bolts is 17 foot-pounds. And that's pretty much everything. Just remember, before you drive away, because we've pushed that caliper piston back in, you're going to need to step on the brake pedal a few times, which will push that caliper piston back out, pressing the pads up against the rotor where they need to be. When you do this, don't press the brake pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just a few times until it feels firm, maybe about halfway down, and then that will press this out and you'll be good to go. Also, remember to double check the fluid level in your brake master cylinder before you head out as well. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.